Hi, guys. So I'm glad that you had the opportunity to drop by and join us once again. So today, what I'm going to attempt to do is to split what we're talking about today. And if it works out that way, the way I'm going to do it is I'm going to talk about the concepts of co-creation first, and then I'm going to talk about and move a little deeper into the ideas of the benefits of spending time in nature and the connections that can be had there and the benefits that can be had to your spiritual awareness, expansion of your awareness if you do those types of things. So, with the idea of co creation, one of the things that has become evident to me as I have listened to people talk, friends talk about our role as creators and the concept of co-creation is that there's some, as far as I perceive it anyway, some misunderstanding to the concept of co-creation and maybe even the terms consensus reality. So I wanted to go through that a little bit. Now, at the onset, what I'm going to tell you is that if you're a beginner in all of this first part may not necessarily be what you want to be viewing. Because what I'm going to do is I'm going to talk in terms that are going to be familiar with individuals who have been associated with create your own reality types of ideas for probably quite some time. And have gotten to this place where what they're trying to do is to become more fully familiar with the idea of what is it that's going on when you're creating your experience around you. How is the interplay work out between you and others in your reality? So those are the type of things that I'm going to talk about in this. So if you're a relative beginner to all this stuff, you may want to move forward and see if I've gotten into the parts about nature and our connectivity with nature. Again, my intent is that it really depends on how long the first part takes. So if you've been doing this for a while, you're aware that, of course, you're not the body. You are, and there's a variety of names that you can use. You can use the deeper self, the inner self, the wider self, the higher mind, the soul. You could say the oversoul if you wanted to. You can even go as far as to say all that is if you wanted to. You could use the word God if you want. Again, I typically don't talk in terms of saying the universe, just because of the way that we've been exposed to the idea of the universe for a long period of time. To me, it feels like there's a little bit of an impersonal slant to it. And of course, there's nothing impersonal about all of consciousness. So, when we create our reality, many of you are familiar, of course, with the concept that it is you as an expression of the self. And we'll talk about perhaps the you that is expressing itself as the idea of being human. So, an extension of the inner you, an expression of the inner you, maybe a focus of the inner you, right? So, that expression of you in collaboration with the deeper aspects of you, those aspects of you that moment by moment by moment are still totally aware of what they are and of their abilities. Where here in this experience, those are very muted for you. You may believe totally that you're just the body, and you may have some awareness that's greater than that, depending on your exploration and the depth that you have allowed yourself to get to. So the concept, of course, is that as the self, as an extension of the self in collaboration with the self, you create the entirety of your experience. Now, what that means is everything in your existence. You're creating your body. You're creating all of the quote unquote material things around you. You're creating the Earth that you're inhabiting. You're creating the solar system that you're inhabiting. You're creating the galaxy that you're inhabiting. You're creating the universe that you're inhabiting. You create all the individuals that you are interacting with. You create all the things that you experience in your reality, right? So that's something that's important to keep in mind, of course, is that of the numberless souls that are in existence, each of those souls are creating their own experience of their own realities, regardless of what's going on. Now, of course, there are infinite number of souls. And what goes on is that very, very typically, always actually, there's an interplay between all of those souls as various ideas of how to explore show up in creation. We'll just say it like that anyway. And as various souls are drawn to explore themselves, to explore consciousness in particular ways, there's a collaboration between those souls. So how does that collaboration function, we'll say, here in physical reality? How is it that you're creating your reality and another soul is creating themselves as a quote-unquote physical being in this physical reality, or in a physical reality that you're going to call your physical reality, because you experience an extension of them within your experience of physical reality. So, for the sake of the explanation, for a while, imagine if you can, or visualize if you can, pretend if you can, whatever word you would like to use, that you exist in this moment as a orb of energy, a sphere of energy, right? And so within that sphere of energy, you're creating all of the experiences that you're having. And it's just your experiences. Then let's bring another soul, another sphere of energy into this. And of course, this is metaphorical to some degree. And the two of you allow your borders to overlap so that there's an area now that is your sphere and the other sphere that are intermingling, right? Something like a Vesica Pisces kind of a thing. You can look that up if you're not quite sure what that is. So you have this area now that overlaps between you, and you're doing this because you would like to create utilizing similar ideas, right? Let's say physical reality. So within that area that you've created, that overlapping area, that's like the meeting place of your ideas about this particular type of reality. And so within that, those ideas exist as well as within your own sphere. So the idea of what this reality is going to be about, the various attributes of it, the various qualities of it, all the various ins and outs of what this reality, this physical reality is about, how it progresses, how it changes, how it morphs, any of those types of things. All those are contained individually for those individuals, we'll say it like that, and in this crossover area, okay? The crossover area is like a meeting room, a collaborative meeting room, all right? And in this meeting room is all the interactions that are going on as far as how these ideas, this idea of physical reality, is going to be played out, how the general themes are going to be enacted, right? So now we can bring in a third individual, a fourth individual, a fifth, a sixth, a seventh, an eighth, a ninth, 100, 200, 300. It really doesn't make any difference. They'll all overlap and have this same area that they overlap within. And within this area is the story of physical reality, this physical dimension. Now, within that overlapping area, as this story plays out, as the general themes of that story play out, what happens is that for each individual in their own sphere, they create those experiences in their own way, right? Now, let's say that in this overlapping area, there's this idea of a group of friends that get together, go to one of these friends' homes and have dinner, right? So there's going to be the idea of a house that this dinner is going to happen in, right? And so the general idea of a house is going to be there. However, each of, we'll call it 10 individuals. So each of the 10 souls that are having this experience, right? They're configuring that house a little different. No one has the same house that they're having in their own reality, even though within this overlapping area, there's this story of we're having dinner in a house. Basically, there's this idea of what the house looks like. But within that, within each individual, there's going to be differences on what that house looks like, right? There might be color differences. There might be size differences. The furniture is going to be different inside, right? There's going to be many, many differences to the house. Because what you're not going to do is you're not going to talk about all the various nuances about what that house is like. There's going to be generalities about the house. And then each individual soul in their story creates their own image of what that house is like, right? The same thing goes on with the individuals themselves, right? So in one of the other 10 individuals' own sphere, they have an idea about what their image is like, what their physical image looks like, right? And they transmit that idea in that common meeting place to everybody else. Now, you can use it very closely to how it was transmitted, or you can translate that and shift that a little bit in the way that you're perceiving that particular individual. And this happens very frequently, actually. You may dress them different. The height might be slightly different. The weight might be slightly different. They may have facial hair in yours, no facial hair with the other individual. You are free to make alterations in that in your reality. It doesn't have to match exactly what goes on with the other one. So again, in this, part of this to remember is that in your reality, you are experiencing your energy in your reality. You are configuring your energy, your consciousness into the storyline and all the props of the storyline that you're co-creating with these other individuals. But the story that you're experiencing is an interpretation of what all of you are agreeing on to whatever degree you're agreeing on it, right? But there's lots of room for creativity in there. All of that, all of what occurs for you is your energy, your consciousness, right? It's not somebody else's consciousness, right? Now, regardless of what goes on, there may be a conversation that ensues in this party that you're having, at this dinner that you're having, and certain things are said. In your reality, you can create those words differently, and frequently you do, right? All the things that can happen within that reality, you are free to create differently in your reality. Now, frequently, this can be due to the filters that you have, which are the beliefs that you hold as an individual, right? As the extension of the rest of you, right? Having the quote unquote physical experience, right? Those beliefs filter the energy that's coming from those other individuals, right? And there's other things too. There are the concepts and ideas that the higher you, the inner you, the higher mind, whatever you would like to say, knows would be helpful for you to have in this experience. So some of the differences that you experience, as opposed to how each of these other individuals are expressing themselves in their reality, right? The differences that you see in that have got to do with a little of that as well. So there's a number of things that are flavoring the perception that you have about what's going on in this common area, this overlapping area. It's information, shall we say, okay, or we can say that there's a connectivity, a communication that's going on behind the scenes that's not happening, quote unquote, within physical reality, if we phrase it like that. So there's this communication that's always going on behind the scenes, but we take that and we mold it the way that we want to, right? Now, because of the experience that we've had, right, in terms of time, right? The idea that physical reality works a particular way. We've had particular experiences in physical reality. And in that, it seems like that's just the way that it goes. That if you have an experience in physical reality, that everybody else in that physical reality, the people, let's say, that live in that house, have the exact same experience, right? But that's not necessarily what's going on. They will create their own versions of that experience in their reality, or not at all in their reality, right? It's really up to them as far as what they create. Again, through a confluence of the belief systems that they're carrying, the way that they see their reality, which has got a lot to do with your belief systems, and the flavoring that the higher mind, the wider them, wants to bring to the situation, right? Now, sometimes it can be very difficult, and I'm going to say it like that, even though it doesn't have to be difficult, but it can be difficult to understand that the events and the circumstances that you experience, sometimes in small environments, like a bathroom or a home or whatever it might happen to be, a coffee shop, let's say, right, are not experienced the same by all the individuals there, or not experienced at all by some of those individuals there. They just do not have that experience. Doesn't make any sense for us, right? Because the thing is that if you perceive something happening, then to you, physically speaking, it should be occurring the same way for everybody else in that reality. But as far as the mechanisms of consciousness are concerned, that's not the way that it works. Each individual creates their own version of that event, or, as I've mentioned, doesn't create the event at all, right? You may have, again, these 10 individuals together at this dinner party, and during the course of the evening, somebody in the kitchen drops a glass and breaks it on the floor. It may be that everybody but 2 individuals, and everybody was, let's say the dining room was right next to the kitchen. Everybody at that moment was in the dining room, right? 8 of those individuals heard that glass break. 2 did not, right? For 2 individuals, that event never happened. But no one really talks about, did everybody experience it? They just respond and react as if it did. And what can occur actually is that those individuals who didn't have it happen won't even have the dialogue in their reality that the other individuals did after the glass broke, right? That whole segment will not be part of their interaction. So part of this, of course, flows with the idea that as you move through your reality, as you move through your moments, I like to call it a moment stream, right? You're going moment by moment by moment by moment, right? And you're picking and choosing your moments, right? Because this is really what's actually going on, right? There's an infinite number of moments to choose from, right? And what you do is you choose those moments and you pull them in. It's like there's a light that you're shining through a film that you're building in the moment, right? You're pulling frame by frame by frame by frame by frame in front of the light so that you can view a movie that's being played, and you have an infinite number of frames to choose from. It's not just a film strip in front of you that's running through the projector, but you're able to pull these different frames in front of that light at an unbelievable speed. As you do this, if you're familiar with the concept, if you've explored metaphysical ideas through channeled sources in any way, shape, or form, you've probably become familiar with the idea of what are called probable selves, right? These are other versions of you that are living in existence that is a little different than your existence, or sometimes a lot different from your existence. And those yous can look close to the way you look, or they can look very different from the way you look. Okay, and we're just going to stick with the probable yous that are really the same body type as you, right? The same sex and things of that nature, okay? Because there's many, many, many probable yous. So we're going to stick with that. Now, the thing is that when the self, when this infinite you creates, when it creates a version of itself, a probable you, it creates all the supporting cast for it, which means an entire universe, right? So each probable you is supported by an entire new universe, a unique universe. This is how unlimited you are. So as you are having experiences, you're moving from probable you to probable you to probable you to probable you. Now, each of these probable yous also have their own memories. Okay. And here's where it can get as if it hasn't gotten a little bit different already, but here's where it can get a little bit difficult maybe to wrap your mind around sometimes, is that in your moment stream, as you move from probable you to probable you to probable you, because you're focused in the moment, as you're having the moment, you have no idea what's been going on in the moment that you've just moved out of, and all of the memories and all the events that were associated with that particular moment. All you know is what's associated with this moment. As you build your reality, you may take a turn, and then in a couple of moments take another turn, and then in a couple of moments take another turn, and then go straight, we'll call it, for a while, and then start taking turns again. Each of those turns is a dramatic enough change in how you're doing things that you have a completely different memory flow that's associated with it. Right? This is your unlimited ability to create the reality that you find yourself immersed in, regardless of where that reality is. So we're talking about physical existence at this particular time. So this is the unlimited nature of the self. You're an extension of that self. You, in collaboration with that inner you, are creating a reality that is your reality. As far as physical reality is concerned, we're not going to talk about the other aspects of that. We're going to focus on this physical dimension of reality right now. And so the idea of co-creation is this behind the scenes stuff that's going on, this overlapping area that's going on where all of the various themes and ideas, concepts about what kind of an experience you're going to have are brought together by all of you. Then each of you experiences that your own way. So co-creation is the collaborative idea about what you want to create. However, your experience is your own individual experience. You create from that idea your own experience. And you experience your own experience. You don't experience somebody else's ideas or experience ever in this reality. You experience yours and nobody else's. And this is happening regardless of how many individuals you have in an environment with you. It doesn't matter if it's a football stadium full of individuals, right? Each individual there is creating their own reality, and you're creating each of those individuals, right? Now, some of those individuals have some detail to them as far as what's going on in your life. Many of those individuals in that football stadium don't have much detail to them as far as what's going on in your life, right? It really depends on the situation. But you're creating everything that goes on. Everything that you're perceiving, we're going to call it that now, everything that you're perceiving is your consciousness, right? You're creating it. All of the actual interactions are happening behind the scenes. They're happening in this overlap area, right? But then again, you get to do with it what you want, right? So you can have a conversation with somebody, and then you can see that individual the next day, talk about that conversation. And they don't recall that conversation the way that you recall that conversation, nor did you have the same conversation. In fact, they may not have even created a conversation that the two of you had in their reality. They may go, what conversation are you talking about? And of course, individuals may just say, well, I don't know how I forgot about that or whatever. It's not about anybody forgetting about it many times. It's about that it never really happened for them, right? It happened for you. It happened in your reality. You created yourself having a conversation with another individual, right? You don't know what that individual in their reality has done. In fact, you never know that. Well, if you bring yourself to a point where you've really opened up your awareness of self, you can start to maybe reach into other people's reality and see what's actually going on in their reality. Most individuals are not at that place right now, right? So in the place that you're at right now, you have no idea how somebody else is creating their own reality. All you know is what you're creating in your reality. That's all you're familiar with right now, is what you're creating in your reality. It may be very similar to what somebody else is creating. It may be very different than what somebody else is creating. You don't know. You have no idea. And it doesn't make any difference, right? What's important is what you're experiencing. All you know is what you're experiencing. Okay? So it's a difficult thing sometimes to wrap your mind around because that's not our physical experience. Our physical experience is that we believe we're surrounded by separate individuals, all doing their own things, right? And all of us having similar situations, right? When there's a war on the planet, everybody on the planet is familiar with it. Not so, right? When weather patterns occur in a city, let's say, and it's raining in a city, everybody in that city is experiencing rain. Not so. It can be as dramatic as you can be walking down the street in the rain, and the individual in your reality that you're walking next to is walking in the rain also. In their reality, it may be sunny. They may be walking by themselves or perhaps next to you, but it's sunny outside. There's no need to have perfect agreement. Many times we don't. But again, you don't know that. You know your experience of your reality. You don't know their experience of their reality. And again, you won't until you've really broadened your awareness out. You're not going to have an idea about what's going on in their reality. You're going to know only your reality. Now, when you quote unquote fall asleep at night and you're in dream time, you're accessing all that stuff, right? You know all those things in that state, right? Once you refocus back here, you don't bring most of that information back with you. Sometimes you do, of course, in dreams, if you're good with dreaming and dream recall, right? But many times it's very symbolic also. And sometimes because, again, of the ideas that go along with physical reality, you will color that a particular way. You will give it a particular meaning. You will think it has to do with the way things occur here, right? Now you can do that less, especially if you had a lot of practice with that, right? But typically, again, that's the way that it usually works. That's the way people do those things. So again, the whole idea of co-creation is not something that's happening within your experience of physical reality. In other words, it's not that all the individuals that you see as individuals are co-creating an event within your experience of reality. That co-creation is happening behind the scenes, right? And then each individual in their own reality is having their own experience of whatever experience you guys all decided to create together, right? So co-creation is not a within your consciousness physical reality event. It is something that's going on behind the scenes, right? Consensus reality is the same thing. When you think about consensus, you're talking about agreed upon, okay? Now, agreed upon, again, in that overlap area is a very general agreed upon, right? It's snowing outside as you're having the dinner. Okay, so that'll be agreed upon. Everybody will have snow show up as they come to your house to have that dinner. Some people have different depths of snow showing up. Some people have icy roads. Some people, the roads weren't icy. Depends on what you talk about too. But again, everybody won't be in those conversations. Or some people will say, well, the roads are really slippery. And someone will say, oh, they didn't seem so slippery to me. But maybe they'll say, oh, that's because I have brand new tires or whatever it might happen to be, right? There'll be these logical reasons why it wasn't the same as somebody else says it, right? And so you have all sorts of layers of that, right? Some things everybody will agree upon, and you'll have certain similarities in that. Other things within your consensus reality, certain individuals will have experienced, other individuals will not experience, right? Like 5 of the people noticed that someone there, maybe they were named John, had a brown sweater on that night, right? The other individuals saw a completely different sweater, or he wasn't wearing a sweater at all. He was wearing something else, right? There is, in that regard, no consensus within individuals, right? There is this overlap area where there is a general consensus about the idea, the theme of what's going to go on at that particular evening, right? But there's a lot of permutations that everybody has the freedom to express in their individual reality. And frequently that's what happens, right? But again, you don't know what's going on in someone else's reality because you're only familiar with your own. And you don't even know what happened. We'll use linear time right now in your day, right? This morning. For the this morning, that makes sense in the moment that you're in now. Because let's say 10 moments ago, maybe your morning was completely different, right? As you move through moment by moment by moment by moment. And for the sake of our exploration right now, we're going to say that those moments they span a longer time than what they actually do. We'll say they span maybe a tenth of a second or something like that, where really there's billions of them that are happening per second. But that can be a very difficult thing to wrap your mind around, that you're moving through probable U's at an unbelievable rate, right? This, of course, is the way that you have the effect of time and motion at the same time, right? Is that, as far as a physical reality is concerned anyway. So, of course, as we have explored metaphysical ideas, spiritual ideas, right, and especially in the last 50 years, there has been a lot of language. There have been a lot of ideas that have been put forward, right? And the way that those ideas have played out, the way that they have metamorphosized maybe, makes sense considering our background. In other words, the ideas that we had about who we are as physical beings, how physical reality actually functioned, right? And as we loosen up on those ideas, and as we begin to get information from sources that are, I'll call it right now, outside of physical reality, that tell us about how all of this actually functions for us, there's interpretation, right? They don't just drop us in the deep end of the pool either, right? So they start with milder ways of expressing those things, right? And then they fill that out decade by decade by decade. Again, it depends on the individual. Some individuals are running into individuals that are filling those things out much more rapidly than others are. And it's not like it's a race or anything like that. You're just doing it at whatever rate you're doing it. You are that. It doesn't really make any difference. In fact, for many, many in linear terms, thousands and thousands of years, most individuals knew nothing but that they were physical beings, right? They understood that there was some other stuff going on out there, but their whole life was spent really thinking that they were a physical being, right? It's in this time period that we have going on now that these things are moving and shaking. They're shaping themselves differently than what they did before. We have more choices than what we had before. We have choices to see ourselves in a much wider way, to experience much more of those deeper aspects of ourselves than we have had, linearly speaking, in a very, very long period of time. Okay. So this is what we're going to talk about as far as a common reality is concerned, a consensus reality is concerned, right? Individuals who are talking about co-creative types of things. Okay. Co-creation happens behind the scenes. It doesn't happen actually in your reality, right? So it's something that you may want to familiarize yourself about as we move forward in this shift that we're going through. Understanding the mechanisms of how consciousness works, how you're actually creating your reality, will serve you. It'll help you. It'll help things to become less confusing than what they are now for you. Okay. So then let's shift and let's talk about nature and our connection with nature, and how very advantageous it can be to deepen that connection, or maybe even to begin to put your attention on that connection. It really depends on where you are in that. Okay. So nature, symbolically speaking, shall we say, is an expression of those deeper layers of who and what we are, right? Belief systems don't associate themselves with the things that go on with nature, right? We have expressions of consciousness throughout nature that express themselves as trees, as bushes, as grass, as all the various animals that are there. And there's some differences, of course, between the animals you find there and the, I guess I'll term them like others have, companion animals that you have in your home, right? They are much more closely aligned to you, and they allow themselves to do that and to associate with the beliefs that you utilize in that collaboration that they have with you in your home. Now, in the wild, we'll call it, it doesn't work that way, right? There's a different approach that animals have. Now, what's important to realize about your connection with nature is that because you are an extension of the self, and because nature is an extension of the self, you and nature are one, just like you and the self are one. So you are an expression of nature as much as anything else is, right? You are not separate from nature. You are part of nature. Now, in terms of linear time again, we've gone through an experience for a while, for the last 800 years, something like that. I'd have to look back at history and see maybe how long it's been, where we have distanced ourselves, right, from the idea of nature, where we have considered ourselves to be the overlord of nature. Or maybe that we need to conquer nature in some way, right? Ideas like that, where the idea of the collaborative interaction that always occurred between us and nature was left behind somehow. And we decided to explore that expression of ourselves differently than what we had previously, right? We have sequestered ourselves in a large degree from our interactions from nature. Now, you can't totally, of course, because weather happens. There's all sorts of things that go on. You still need food, right? There's all these things that are there as far as nature is concerned. Now, of course, what's going on now is that there is a much greater awareness of our connection to nature than there has been for a long time. And again, that depends on the individuals that you're talking about. Certainly, there have been pockets of individuals around the globe, quote unquote, that have never lost their connection with nature, that have always understood their connection with nature, and have always understood their deeper awareness as well, right? And have worked very collaboratively in that way, right? But in terms of how most individuals see their experience, their human experience in this physical reality, what's gone on is we've sequestered ourselves from nature, right? We've kind of put barriers between ourselves and nature, right? And in that, what's gone on is we've become anxious about nature many times, a little fearful about nature, right? Because we don't understand it the way that we used to, right? So this time period that we've got going on, this shifting period, this transition period that's happening right now, is all about that. Partially, it can be about reclaiming your understanding, reclaiming your experience of being one with nature. So this is helpful because if what you're after is to become increasingly aware of who and what you are as a spiritual being, right, as the self, part of that is going to be flavored by the experience that you're presently having, right? The physical experience where you're on this planet, we'll just say it like that. So in that, you're meant to collaborate with the whole of the planet, right? And there are expressions, I guess I'll say it like this right now, expressions of consciousness that are associated with the planet that are largely unfamiliar by most individuals on the planet right now, right? Those individuals, those expressions of us, of consciousness that are associated with the planet, were expressions that were more familiar to us hundreds of years ago, right? We interacted with those other expressions of us in a much more immediate and meaningful way than what we do now. Right now, they're their fantasy or their story or things of that nature, right? We don't really consider those types of things to be part of what actually goes on. Right? But if you've been involved in this exploration for a long enough period of time, even if you have some likings in the things that are going on in quantum physics right now, you're starting to see some shifts in how they view energy and consciousness, right? By some individuals that are in those fields in this particular moment. We're not going to go into those things in the moment. We're going to talk about this stuff. So, what I can suggest to you from my own experience is, first of all, going into nature is a fantastic way to regain a sense of peace and calmfulness in your day-to-day life. Right? This is what I saw in my life. Right? Many, many years ago, when I first started going into nature on a regular basis, on almost a daily basis, what I found would happen is that it would take a certain length of time when I was in the area that I chose, and usually it was a fairly large area that I could be pretty much secluded by myself in. And when I was there, it would take me, I don't know, it was probably like 20 minutes, 25 minutes in there someplace, and it would vary by day, before I could leave the hurried nature of my regular life behind and start to feel differently, start to feel more in step with the environment that I was in, right? The natural environment, because there's nothing hurried about the natural environment, right? It's got a pace and a feel to it that's much different. So what you'll find is that the more that you're in that setting, the more it'll have that type of an effect on you. Now, when you go into that setting, I'm going to suggest a couple of things. If you can, go by yourself. If you can, don't bring a device that you're going to listen to in with you. Don't listen to music or anything else. Now, if it's metaphysically based things, especially things that are associated with our interaction with nature, it's not going to hurt you at all to listen to that the first few times that you go in, right? If that's what you want to do, it's not going to hurt you to bring a friend in who is like-minded also, right? Because really what you want to do is you don't want to have a lot of conversation. What you're after is you're after the experience of being there, okay? So when you're in there walking or sitting, you can do either. If you're walking, it's not about how fast can you get from point A to point B. Again, it's just about being there. In fact, I would, if I were you, slow yourself down almost as much as you possibly can. So it's an incredibly slow walk, right? And what you want to do is pay attention to the things that are going on around you. Now, again, if you have a like-minded friend, you can bring that individual with you. And it's not going to kill things. It's not going to ruin your experience if you have a little conversation, right? But really what you're looking for, because again, each of you is having your own experience, is you want to have your experience while you're there. Nothing wrong with talking about the experience afterwards or even while you're doing it at first. I'm going to suggest that eventually what you want to do is you want to go in by yourself. Right? You want to have your interaction with nature not flavored by somebody else there. Right? Now, you may want to do it with another individual because maybe you're not quite comfortable with being in nature yet, okay? Or in a place that's large enough where you can be kind of in some solitude. That's fine. Do whatever you need to do in that regard, right? Take whatever measures you need to. If you're going to walk at first with a group of individuals and you're heading in that direction, in other words, the direction where eventually you're going to walk by yourself, that's fine too. Do that, right? But the goal in this terms, anyway, I suggest should be that eventually you're going to be by yourself, right? As you become increasingly familiar, increasingly comfortable with being in that kind of environment, right? Now, when you do that, you can, if you want to, begin to interact with certain things. Sit on a rock and be present with the rock while you're sitting on the rock, right? Go up and touch a tree and try to sense if there's anything that you can feel energetically, I'll just put it that way, as you touch the tree. or stand in the middle of a circle of trees, and see if you can sense anything while you do that, right? You may feel nothing for the first month, 2 months, 3 months, whatever it might happen to be. It kind of depends on where you are in this journey and your exploration and being in nature, things of that type. But eventually you're going to start to notice things. And even if you don't eventually, what's going to happen again, this experience, being in nature, is going to have an effect on you, right? It's going to have an effect on making you calmer, at bringing more peace into your life, and allowing you opportunities to have different types of feeling states and different types of thoughts come into your awareness, other than the ones that are there all the time or that were there all the time, right? It's a powerful place to do this. The more that you're out there, the more opportunity there's going to be to have deeper interactions while you're there, right? Again, what you're talking about is you're talking about consciousness, your consciousness, right? Expressing itself as the force that you're in. So it's you that's surrounding you, right? You're surrounded in that moment by yourself. And so you can take the opportunity to interact with yourself. Now, just like there are many probable yous, and just like there are many yous that are being expressed throughout creation in very different ways, there are also ways that your consciousness, the larger you, expresses itself in association with the planet. We'll say it like that right now. And in ways that are associated with nature, and in ways that, again, many years ago, we were much more familiar with. In today's world, we're much less familiar with. Again, unless you're one of those groups of individuals who've been doing this for a long period of time and you've never left it behind, or you've begun to look for those connections again, right? And so you can invite those experiences back into your life if you want to, right? And don't have any really firm concept of how that needs to happen. Just put the invitation out there that you know that there are expressions of yourself, of that greater you, that are associated with nature, right? That have various forms and shapes that can show up as part of your experience, right? Sometimes they'll show up as just a regular animal in your experience, but you'll know once you've been doing this for a while, because of the feeling you have about that interaction, that there's something different going on with that interaction than other interactions that you've had, right? Maybe you'll be able to sense that there are animals around you or heading in your direction when you've been in that environment for a while, or that things are going to change, the weather's going to change, right? Or maybe some particular animal or group of animals is going to pass by where you are, whatever. There's all sorts of things that can begin to happen with you, right? The concept is that just to be open to whatever the experiences might be, to know that there's all sorts of things that can happen for you in that environment, right? And again, it's your natural environment. It's you. You're walking through you when you do that. Your consciousness is expressed in this particular way, right? And there's all sorts of, again, other expressions of consciousness that are associated with it, right? There's much more to this expression of the planet than just our human expression on this planet. Of course, we know of all the animals and the things in the sea and stuff of that nature, but there are other expressions of us that are not as physical, shall we say, as ourselves and the animals and other things around us, right? That are as much part of our experience as we are to the experience, right? And you can have interactions with those other aspects of yourself, right? You just need to invite the experience, and then allow the experience is what it's about. But that may take some time, quote unquote, right? You may have to be in physical reality to start to feel, I guess what I'll call in the moment, the magic of being in the woods, in nature, right? Because again, there's a connection that's there that when we first get into it, we've largely forgotten. Or perhaps we've flavored it a particular way. right? Because it was a challenge. That's the way that we saw it, right? We're out on the trail and we're running. It's a particular type of a challenge, or we're hiking a particular distance. That's a challenge, right? Whatever might happen to be, we're out backpacking, right? And it's a challenge, right? Can I be out there for 7 days by myself, with a pack on, right? It's a challenge. That's the way that we see nature. We have a connection to it, but we have a particular flavor that we're flavoring it with, right? This is a little different thing. This is being out there and having some of those same connections, but understanding it in a different way, understanding that it's a collaboration between us and it, right? We're the same. We're different expressions of the same consciousness, right? Of the same self. And so in that, there's a huge amount of information that's there that you can tap into and then gain from in your life, right? You can walk through that environment and have all sorts of ideas about all sorts of things that you're doing in your life show up for you that you can use to your advantage, right? You can be in that environment, and in that environment, you can shift and move yourself through probable use so that a physical problem, a physical challenge that you've had is lessened while you're in there. And maybe you hang on to that. I can tell you my experience in there. Again, I said that it would take me a certain length of time before I could leave behind the feelings of regular daily life and then experience what it was like to be in the forest, the energy of the forest. After a certain length of time, I think it was a couple of months. It's hard to say. It's been such a long, in linear terms, time since I first began to do this. I realized that I now had that with me all the time. I didn't have to go to the forest to have that feeling. I had it with me always. Okay. Now you can nurture that state within yourself in other ways as well, right? But this is a very potent way to do that, is to be out in nature. When you go in, as I suggested, if you're going to be walking, first of all, be prepared for what the day is going to bring, right? Dress appropriately. Dress in shoes that you can walk in comfortably. Wear clothing that's going to be comfortable in that environment. If there's a chance that it might rain, right, bring a rain jacket with you. A small backpack. Bring some water with you. A little bit of food if you're going to be out there for a few hours, right? Make it an experience that is a nice experience for you. Right? And then when you're in walking, what you want to do is you want to pay attention to where you are, to the sounds that you hear, the wind, whatever it is, the animals, all the various things, the birds, the things that you're seeing, the things that you're smelling, right? The things that you're noticing around you, whatever might happen to be occurring, that's all you're doing. You're just being there, right? You're not hurrying through it. You're experiencing it. And so you may want to set aside 2 hours and pick a walk that you can do easily in that length of time. It's much better to pick something that's shorter and have a little time left over than something that you have to hurry any place through it to finish it up, right, within the time period that you've allotted for yourself, because you don't want to hurry, right? You want it to be nice and slow. Now, what you can do also is you can pick various locations. You can sit on a rock, like it said. You can sit next to some body of water. You can lean up against a tree while you do that, right? You can use a pine tree if you want to, or you can use any other kind of tree that draws you to it, right? You can lean up against it if you want, or you can just have it behind you and have that source of water in front of you. And you can just sit there and pay attention to those things. Pay attention to your breath like you do like in many meditative states. And maybe listen to the wind as you're listening to your breath. Pay attention to the water, the sounds that the water is making. And then maybe pay attention to the sound or the feeling you're having of your heartbeat at the same time that you're listening to the water, and then bring those things together, right? What you can attempt to do also is, I mentioned touching trees. You can also lay your hands on the ground as you're seated someplace. And imagine extending your energy, right, into the ground. Let's say you form a bubble around yourself, right, or a half a bubble, right, and it goes down into the ground a certain amount, 5 feet, 10 feet, 15 feet, 20 feet. You get to choose, right? And then what do you feel? You may feel nothing. You may feel nothing the first 20 times. Doesn't make any difference, right? Or you may feel something after you've done it for a while. You may feel something right away. It depends on the individual. Again, it's not a race, right? It's not a competition, right? It's your experience. And so there's many things that you can do to connect when you're in there. And the more you do, the more benefit you're going to get from being in that environment. It's a powerful environment. It has a lot to offer, way beyond what most people have come to understand. Okay. So find a place. Now, if in the beginning, all you have is a park that's next to your house, maybe it's 1 block square, right? Then use that. Try to be there at a time where there are less people there, right? Find maybe a part of that park that you can sit in. You might want to bring something to sit on because they may not have a bench where you're a little away from other individuals, right? And you want a little bit of space between you and other individuals because you don't want to be able to hear a lot of what's going on. Now, in the beginning, you might not have much of a choice, right? Until you can find other places. But if you can, that's what I would endeavor to do. And endeavor to find places that you can be relatively away from other individuals, right? Where you're not hearing all the things that they're doing, you're not hearing their conversation. And better yet is if you can find a place where you're not hearing vehicles, right? But in the beginning, that may not be something that you can do. It may be too difficult. So just do what you can, right? It might be your backyard at first, right? It doesn't make any difference. Go into your backyard early in the morning or late at night, or maybe your front yard. Depends on what's bigger, maybe, and what's more quiet. The lighting in the beginning really won't make any difference. If it feels more secure to you to be in a place that's well lit, that's fine. It's not a problem whatsoever. It's not going to mess anything up at all, right? In fact, the inner you understands the inhibitions you may have, the little bits of insecurity or anxiety or fears you may have about things like that, right? If they happen to be there, and understands those things, it's not going to push you or think you need to jump in the deep end of the pool, right? You're free to wade in from the shallow end, right? And go as deep as you can, more so all the time, perhaps. Okay. So pick a spot, pick a place, try to be there relatively consistently, right? Try to be there and put your attention on the environment that you're in and the things that occur in that environment. Now, in the beginning, like I said, what you may do is carry your life with you. In other words, all the things that you're thinking about, all the things that you're worrying about, all the events that are going on in your life that day, whatever might happen to be, they may be with you. And the first few times, maybe that won't fade into the background. Maybe it'll take being there for a week or 2 weeks or something like that before you start to experience that in your life, right? But once you do, it'll grow. And then when you're walking to that place or when you're driving to that place, it'll begin to occur before you even get there, right? And it'll deepen once you're there. And then again, what'll happen is that eventually you're going to have it in your life all the time. And then you can deepen that experience in all sorts of different ways. Okay. Again, by inviting all the various experiences that you can have out there and allowing those experiences to take place. This is where on this journey, being open to difference, to things being out of the ordinary, is very useful for you. Because as you become more and more of who and what you are, that's what's happening. You're adding awareness of parts of yourself that right now you're unfamiliar with. They're different. They can be quite different sometimes, right? And so embracing difference, embracing change, right? Embracing unfamiliar to the greatest degree that you can as you do these types of things will really serve you nicely, right? Because then it allows more to show up in your experience, right? And using those things will then allow you to widen your bubble of your greater awareness. In other words, to move into your greater awareness more than you would otherwise. So all these things are going to be part of your experience. So in this way, you can use nature in a very powerful way to help you with this. Okay. So I think for now, that will make it our third podcast in this particular format. I think we'll end it here. And again, I hope that you guys are enjoying your journey. I hope you're enjoying your exploration. I hope that you're finding it increasingly fulfilling and satisfying all the time. And we will see you next time around. Okay? Take care.